And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mr. Feeney, and today we're going to be talking about the evolution of civil rights through the legal process. You'll see here I have a little subtitle under my lesson heading, which is that it's been an ongoing American struggle, this evolution of civil rights. Okay? I have a picture here of the current justices of the Supreme Court. Okay? And as you'll see as we talk about a number of cases throughout this lesson today, that their predecessors have written, the battle for civil rights, the struggle for civil rights, has at times been frustrated by none other than the 9 smartest lawyers in our country. Okay? It has been an ongoing American struggle with, at times, frustratingly slow movement, and at times, for those people who have really fought to secure equal rights for everyone in this country, they must have felt like they were moving backwards. Okay? Let's talk today about what we'll be learning. Okay? As teachers, we have this phrase, students will be able to. By the end of this lesson today, you guys, my students, will be able to explain and analyze the key events, the court cases, and the resulting policies in the evolution of the American civil rights movement. Okay? We have here the Supreme Court of the United States. Okay? And in order to truly understand what the current state of civil rights law is in the United States today, we have to go back to some of the earliest cases. Okay? So let's dive right in just a minute. The first thing I'm going to ask you all to do, I'm the mayor. Okay? If your last name begins with A to M, please go to that room, or that side of the room, excuse me. And if your last name begins with N to Z, I'd like you over there. Okay? For those of you, A to M, congratulations. I must really like you guys. Okay? For the rest of the semester, you guys are allowed to use the entire football field at lunchtime. Okay? You can enjoy sitting out on the grass. You'll have plenty of space and enjoy the sunshine. Just have a grand old time. Okay? For those of you N to Z, the only grass that you're going to be able to use is that little tiny patch of grass between the football field and the classroom building. I know it sounds unfair, okay, but you each do have a grass surface, and frankly, I just don't want you guys mixing with them, okay? If I actually proposed this, would anybody here in the room think it was fair? Of course not. Of course it wouldn't be fair. Why should it possibly be that, based on this arbitrary idea of your last name ending in a certain letter, that some people have more rights than others? Well, unfortunately, for so many people in this country, that type of arbitrary division was for so long based on the color of your skin. Okay? This is an actual picture. It's probably taken in the 1930s or 1940s. We have here 2 drinking fountains. This one, this tiny little dinky one, is for quote-unquote colored people. And this one here, for white people. Larger, more grandiose. If a colored person was caught drinking out of this fountain, he or she could be arrested simply because a person of a certain skin color was drinking out of a quote-unquote white person's drinking fountain. Let's get into the cases and talk about how this moment here was possible and was in fact allowed by the law for so long. Okay? First, in 1857, and folks, I've given you a handout that just has the names of the cases or the policies here. You're going to be taking these notes here, filling them in, and this is the material, this and the following pages, that we'll be using for the rest of the day. So please do take good notes. Okay? In 1857, you have a gentleman by the name of Dred Scott, okay? He is a slave who was descended from an African, somebody who was actually brought over from Africa in the slave trade, ostensibly kidnapped from their home country, okay? And his owner had a habit of traveling a lot and was actually taking him to states where slavery was not legal, okay? And so he sued for his freedom, saying, I'm still enslaved in states where there are no slaves because it's not legal here. Okay? It sounds like a pretty compelling argument, okay? What he was doing for his owner was breaking the law. So he said, I should be free. Okay, but the Supreme Court, in an ultimate act of cowardice, doesn't want to get involved. Okay? So they decide, and this holding lasted for quite a while, they decided that Mr. Scott, the merits of his lawsuit couldn't even be discussed because he, as the descendant of an African slave, was not a citizen of the United States. So he was born in the U.S., okay, lived here, but because he was descended from an African slave, he was not considered to be a citizen and therefore couldn't access the judiciary. It is, as I said a moment ago, the height of cowardice, particularly because of this. Folks, as somebody who practiced law for 11 years before becoming a teacher, I can tell you, you don't have to be a citizen of this country to maintain a lawsuit. Okay? As we move on through the rest of the 1800s, okay, the Supreme Court had a problem, okay, because people, whether they were people of color, African Americans, Hispanics, or whether they were white, they were all doing the same thing. The country was growing, okay? The population was getting larger. And when you are coming up with a system that treats people differently on the basis of their own, of their skin color, there's going to be natural fallout, okay? In 1896, you have Homer Plessy, who, as a part black and part white man in Louisiana, was by law considered to be quote-unquote colored, okay? And as a result was required to sit in the colored car of the train which he was riding, okay? He decided he didn't want to do that. Okay? So he buys a ticket, sits down in a seat in the much more comfortable white car, and is discovered by the conductor, told to get up, and when he doesn't, he's arrested. Okay? And he takes his case all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said that it was okay to segregate the races because there was a car for the quote-unquote colored people, and because there were cars for the quote-unquote white people, that was okay. It was constitutional because it was separate but equal. It was okay to separate the races as long as there was some sort of accommodation for people of color. Okay, but of course, as you've seen with the drinking fountain picture, separate was not equal. Okay, and that is ultimately what was decided in this case, Brown versus Board of Education. 50 years after Plessy versus Ferguson, Oliver Brown's daughter, Linda, she's an African-American third grader, she has to walk by a white school to hop onto a bus to go to her all-black school. Okay? Her father sues on her behalf and says, this is not right, this is not fair to my daughter, and this time the Supreme Court got it right. In a 9-0 unanimous decision, they said that separate but equal was inherently unequal, okay? And it overruled the horrible holding in the Plessy versus Ferguson matter, okay? Now, Brown versus Board was an outstanding decision, okay? But it really drew into focus what happens when you have decades worth of unequal treatment that have been condoned by the law, okay? And so, in response, the country began to develop a series of policies that are known as affirmative action, okay? The short explanation, of course, is that it's a series of programs developed throughout the 20th century wherein people who were in minority groups would at times be given preference in hiring over Caucasians, might have relaxed admission standards for colleges, and given other sorts of preferential treatment based on the color of their skin or their ethnic background. And if you think about it, and certainly a lot of people have made this argument, that could in and of itself be considered to be discrimination based on race, okay? But the important thing to know about affirmative action and why it is such a vital part of our society is that it exists to remedy the present day effects of past discrimination against people of color and certain minorities. Okay, it acknowledges that there have been lesser opportunities for people who were for so long constitutionally discriminated against as a result of holdings in cases like Plessy versus Ferguson. And it's simply attempting to remedy the current day effects of that past discrimination. Okay? Affirmative action itself has been subjected to a number of constitutional challenges. In 1978, Christopher Bakke sued the University of California Medical School after he was denied admission. Okay? And he basically said this is unfair. The school itself is actually setting aside a certain number of seats specifically for African American candidates. Okay? And the Supreme Court agreed with him in part. It said, okay, look, race can be a factor in making admissions decisions, but you can't go so far as to have quotas, okay, setting aside certain seats. And California has gone a step further. Proposition 209, California voters have actually approved a constitutional amendment that prohibits government organizations and schools from recognizing race, gender, and ethnicity. So let's move on to the guided practice.